I am a high school mathematics teacher in the Lower Merion School District right outside of Philadelphia. So I got into this career path because as an undergrad, I didn't really love chemical engineering. I just kind of signed up for it. My dad told me to get the most technical degree that I could, so I went that route, but wasn't sure it was really for me in the end. And I ended up finding a teaching program called the New York City Teaching Fellows. And there are programs like that all around the country that they recruit people who don't have an education background into the field. I had a very quick abbreviated training, and then while I started teaching, they were able to help me get my master's degree. So that's how I ended up in the field. I did that program not knowing that that would be my career path. I just wanted to try something for a few years, and it turns out that I really loved actually teaching and teaching mathematics in particular.
I currently work as an account manager at Clarity Water Technologies out in the greater New York City area.
I went to work for Mobile Research and Development in Paulsboro, New Jersey. And there I started out initially as just a technologist working on complex mathematical models of refinery processes. After a couple years of doing that, I moved up to a project leader in charge of those kind of activities, and then quickly moved on to leading research groups in different refinery technology areas like cat cracking, lubricant production, synthetic fuels, and so forth. Eventually, I moved up into managing a research group, and then moved up into a directorship in ExxonMobil, and led a group of about 120 people developing various refinery technologies, cat cracking, hydroprocessing, and so forth in the refineries, and lubricant technologies.
I started at Dow Chemical down in Freeport, Texas, just south of Houston. I worked in a plant called LHC7, which is an ethylene cracker on the Gulf Coast. I started there as an entry-level production engineer, owning and operating a section of the ethylene facility. From there, I went to LHC9, which was a startup, a brand new ethylene cracker a little bit further down the road, and I did commissioning and startup work there. I led the cleaning and the acceptance of a lot of our circuits from construction, and then I led the leak check of the entire plant so we wouldn't have any leaks when it started up. Once that plant started, I did a relocation over to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where I work right now, in another ethylene cracker where I serve as a senior production engineer. So this is my third production related role. And I help mentor and coach a lot of our new chemical engineers that start out from college. And I also do a lot of higher level management system and operating discipline improvement and revisions.
My career started with Westinghouse. I made weapons grade plutonium for several years, and then I transferred to research, and then finally into engineering. Did engineering projects for DuPont over the past several years, and transitioned into some management roles, and then finally now I'm a corporate leader that basically helps the corporation develop its capital program.
After college, I started with a company called Rhodia in a rotational program called the Foundations for the Future program. I started as a production engineer in a sulfuric acid plant in Houston, Texas. I did my second rotation as a process engineer in Baltimore, Maryland, and my third rotation was in process safety, where I was a corporate engineer traveling to all of our sites in the business unit. I then did some work in process safety before becoming a technical manager for the site. Now as a technical manager, I'm responsible for process safety and quality for my facility.
Started working for Mobil Oil at their research and development facility in Paulsboro, New Jersey in '75. I started out doing traditional chemical engineering kinds of stuff, did pilot plant work on cat cracking and reforming and basic refining studies. And also during that time, it was the decade of the environment. Clean Water Act had just kicked in. The company put in a bunch of wastewater treatment plants around the world. Nobody knew how to run them, so they asked me to do pilot plant work on wastewater treatment units so that we could learn more about how they operated and how to optimize them. That was my first entree into the environmental world, enabled me to use both my biology and chemical engineering, which was very helpful. As my career progressed, I did a number of interesting things, but I always seemed to come back to the environmental area. I moved to New York headquarters, working in the supply department, trying to figure out which refineries would produce what kind of yields from different crudes, and on that basis then they would decide where to send the ships to pick up the crude, where to take them to which refineries and so on. But I always came back to the environmental stuff. A job opened up in the corporate environmental group, and I was ideally suited because I had that technical background. So I worked on not only clean water issues with the EPA, but also the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, the hazardous waste regs, both from the regulatory perspective and also got into some legislative work there.
Hi, my name is Brad Sutliff. I am a Penn State Chemical Engineering graduate from 2005. I also have a minor in the Polymer Science option. Presently, I'm working as Maintenance and Engineering Manager for Solvay in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania, which is not too far away from Penn State. Prior to that, I worked for a company by the name of Lonza for 8 years, and then prior to Lonza, I had worked for a company by the name of Rhodia right out of college.
I got hired by Rhodia in 2011 into their Foundations for the Future program, and I rotated in 3 sites. First, I went to Vernon, Texas. Second, I went to Bristol, Pennsylvania doing process engineering. And third, I did a rotation in Winder, Georgia, where I was a health, safety, and environmental engineer. I rotated then to my mainstream role in Lock Haven, Pennsylvania as the health and safety manager for the site. And then I just recently transitioned into my role as production manager at the site.
From then, I worked in the planning department for research and engineering, and then corporate planning, where I worked on, believe it or not, international trade issues. The company needed an international trade expert. I knew nothing about international trade, but because I had been able to work on these complicated RCRA regulations, they said, well, you know, RCRA regulations are complicated. Brian could explain those to us. We'll see what he can do with trade regulations. So I worked on international trade. I worked on the US-Canada Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, as well as the broader multilateral GATT negotiations, which resulted in the World Trade Organization establishment in the 1990s.